What's up, guys? Welcome to the first episode of Bunter's Garage. My name is Hunter. This is my 1967 Volkswagen Beetle, and throughout this series I'm going to take you on my build process of my new engine because the last one blew up, as unfortunately so many air-cooled Volkswagens do. Today I'm just going to do a brief overview of your case inspection, what you're going to look for when you're either planning on buying a new case or reusing your old one. There's going to be some key aspects you want to make sure are present before you decide to either scrap or reuse a case. And a brief overview of if you're buying a new case, like what your options are as far as price and features, etc. Just a brief overview of what I plan to do on this channel. Right now, these first couple videos probably going to be more on the informative side, kind of like not lecture style, but very straightforward. We're going to be on the bench looking at a lot of technical stuff ranging from stuff you want to machine, tolerances, just various stuff like that. Later down the line, in the next month or so, I want to feature some of my friends' cars because we have a car group that we're all nerds and we get together, and we have all sorts of different cars. We've got American stuff, Japanese stuff, old German stuff, new German stuff, anything from a little four-banger to a V8. So, just kind of have more fun videos like that too, like if we're doing anything fun like straight piping something or whatever it may be, autocross, whatever, just kind of some more fun videos like that. But for now, we're just going to be diving into the technical stuff on this Beetle, so let's get cracking on our case inspection. Two more quick little things before we get started on this case inspection. One, I just want to apologize for the video quality. I have a very old GoPro and I'm still learning how to use the editing software on my computer, so these first couple of videos are going to be a little unpolished. The audio might be a little shoddy in some places, so just forgive me for that in advance, and I'll do my best to buy a microphone, get more accustomed to video editing. And secondly, if there's anything I don't mention in any of my videos, please treat the comment section like a forum. I really want to get everyone informed, everyone involved. Don't take my word for set in stone, right? Everyone has different opinions on stuff, how to do stuff, where to buy stuff, what are and are not good practices. So if you either disagree with something or if I leave something out, please do not hesitate to call me out or leave a note in the comments. Like I said, I want everyone to be active on this thing. I don't want you to just take for my word as solid truth. I do my own research. You should as well. And if you have anything to add, please contribute, because that's what makes the car scene so awesome. And on that note, we'll finally get into this case inspection. I know you've been waiting. This is a long intro. It's my first video. Sorry. But now that's all out of the way, we can get crack-a-lacking. Alright guys, so here we are on the bench here with the left side of the case half. And I'm just going to go through real quick with a brief overview of the components of this case half, as well as areas of concern that you need to look for when deciding to reuse your engine case that came out of your Beetle. So the basics to this side of the case half, also known as the studless case half, are the main bearing bores right here, 1, 2, and 3. You have your cam bearing bores, 1, 2, and 3. And then you have your 4 lifter bores as well. And that's on the inside of the case. On the outside, you have the oil filler hole. This is where the oil filler mounts. And then on here, this is where the barrels or the cylinders slip in. And then you have the holes where your push rod tubes will meet and your push rods will come out this way. So main areas of concern on really both sides of the case that you want to look for are the main bearing bores. So you can see there's a line running through each of them, and this is impossible to really pick up on camera, but you can feel it. In your case, you'll be able to kind of feel it with your fingernail. That's actually because the main bearing, you can see there's that little journal in the middle. That's your oil journal. When it's sitting in the bore like that and the case is bolted together, the vibration actually beats the magnesium down, because remember, these are magnesium alloy cases, so they're very malleable. The metal is very soft, and so actually over time what happens is there's like a raised surface right there. The solution to this is either one, the more expensive route, obviously the more simple route, just buy a new case. The second route is to get it a line board, which basically means the case halves are slapped together and torqued down to spec, and then a big drill is sent all the way through the case. And what this does effectively is it creates a new flat surface for oversized bearings to fit. These are standard size bearings, which is why these fit in like that. But let's say you get your case align board, you're gonna have to get what are called oversized bearings, is this one here. Now visually there isn't really a huge difference, but as you can see when I try to put it in this side of the case half, it sticks out a bunch, and that's because this is 20 thousandths over bearing. Align boarding isn't too expensive. It's only, I think at my machine shop they quoted me $140. But the thing is, it's not even worth getting an align board if there are some of the other telltale signs of a worn case that I'll show you here in just a minute. Alright, so test number 1 to see if your case is reusable is actually looking at these journals, right? Any case that you have are going to have these lines, but there's going to be one thing you're going to have to take into consideration before you get an align board, either for the first time or possibly again. So on this side of the case half, there usually, if a case has been machined before, there's going to be a series of numbers right here that'll indicate how much it's been machined and to what size. So when you have, this is what I have here is called a virgin case, so there's actually no markers here. But every time it's bored, numbers are stamped here. If they run out of room there, they sometimes stamp it here. And it basically tells the machine shop if you're trying to rebuild your motor, or it tells you if you're trying to rebuild your motor how much larger these bores are than stock. Once you get to 8 thousandths of an inch, that case is, I mean, I don't want to sound pessimistic, but it's basically scrap. When you're at that point, you have to get custom bearings made. They make oversized bearings up until 8 thousandths, but after that you actually have to get them custom made. And just the metal right here, it gets thinner, it gets a little bit weaker, and at that point, if it's been bored out that many times, that's indicative of a case that's been used a lot and has a lot of miles on it, and so it's probably going to have some of the other features we're going to go over, some other telltale signs that it's just time to kiss that case goodbye. So the first test you can do really easily at home to determine whether you can use your old case or not is the lifter bore test. So what I have here is just a lifter that actually came out of this motor when I took it apart. All you're going to do, it's super simple, is you just clean the lifter. I've already sprayed brake clean down the bore so they're nice and clean. And you take the case and you just slip in the lifter about halfway into the hole, like so. Now what you're going to do is wiggle it back and forth in multiple directions. You don't want to just go up and down or side to side, because each cam lobe will wear slightly differently, and these lifters rotate in the bores as the engine runs. So you don't want to just check for wear up and down or side to side. You kind of want to go all around and wiggle it in several directions. What this is going to show you is the lifter bore wear. So like I said before, these cases are magnesium. They're a very soft, very malleable material. These lifters are steel. So if they're well lubricated, you're not going to see a whole lot of wear here, but over time, the distance that I can move up and down in the bore is going to get larger. There's a certain tolerance for this, which I'll throw up on the screen, but really just a fast, easy check is to wiggle it back and forth, and if you can just feel an ever so slight movement, let's see if I can get a better angle here. If you can just feel just a little bit of movement, but it still moves freely in the bores, that's usually indicative that your case is not too worn. There's some other stuff you want to look for, but if it passes this test, at least it's one down, couple more to go, so to speak. You're going to want to test each bore. I've just done one for the sake of the video, but you're going to want to clean each bore. You're going to want to take a lifter, throw it in the bore, and then just wiggle it back and forth and make sure it's within tolerance. You can do this in several ways if you really want to measure it exactly. You can use a dial indicator, you can use a caliper, but really it's like you'll be able to use your judgment. You'll be able to tell if there's just too much play. So like I said, a slight wiggle back and forth, just a tiny little bit. It shouldn't be clanking around in there. There shouldn't be you shouldn't be able to just kind of throw it in and it slap all the way down there and kind of vibrate. It should go in solid like this. Just one solid thunk. It shouldn't be clonking around. And yeah, that's the lifter bore test. So let's move on to test number 2. Alright, so now that you've determined that your case is usable because the main bores still have room to be machined and your lifter bores are within tolerance, you're going to want to move on and check for cracks. Cracks are very common in magnesium cases, especially the OEM ones, the older cases, because as magnesium goes through heat cycles, it gets brittle and eventually cracks. Some main areas of concern that you're going to look for on this side of the case are between the barrels, between the holes where the barrels mount in the case right here. You're going to want to check the metal between where the head studs mount and, again, the holes for the barrels. You're going to want to check this side of the case as well. Sometimes there's cracks here, not as common, but just, give it a good once over. You want to see where the oil pump mounts too, that's all clean. The metal is not nicked up or gouged in any way. On the bottom side of the case, if yours has been sitting in a field for some time, or if it's just been full of oil or sitting on any wet surface, magnesium will actually corrode. This one is actually not too bad. This one was sitting in oil for a little while, so you can see you can kind of chip it off and it's still a good color underneath. But a lot of the times, I'll throw a picture up, the magnesium will kind of get white and there'll be this kind of spiderweb looking stuff over it. And that's kind of the magnesium equivalent of rust. It's weakened structurally, and at that point you just need to check the case, even if it's not cracked. The last part you're going to want to check for cracks on are, again, these are much less common, but occasionally I have seen 1 or 2 cases where they'll crack where the push rod tubes insert into the case. And lastly, you're going to want to check where it mounts up to the transmission. So kind of where it mounts up to the bell housing or the rear of the case. Not as common on this side of the case because the number 3 cylinder gets the hottest and that's on the other side. We'll go over that in a bit. But as you can see here, the metal is kind of recessed. It's pretty thin. So you're just going to want to check all around here. You're going to start from up above, make sure there's no cracks. Move down towards the middle. Obviously this case looks good. And then we move down again right here. This is usually where most of the cracks happen, but on the right side of the case. On the left side, not super common, but it is good to give it a once over. And I'll actually give you a tip in just a sec on how to spot cracks way easier than just using your naked eye, or just using your eyes. Before we move on to the other side of the case, a really quick tip that's easy to do at home to make the cracks a little bit easier to see, because sometimes they are, like, seriously, you have to look under a microscope or like with a magnifying glass to see, is the blowtorch method. So basically you're going to flip your case side over like this, and you're going to take any non-flammable thin liquid. So you could do like a penetrating fluid, penetrating oil. You could even use really thin motor oil if you have some. I know that like new Ford engines use like 0 weight 20. Honestly it's as thin as water, basically. And you're just going to want to throw a little bit all around the inside of the case. So this case I haven't really cleaned out fully. You can see it kind of glistens. That's about how much you're going to want to throw in there. Not enough to like spill out everywhere and make a mess, but enough to coat the metal, the surface. And then you're going to want to mount your case somewhere where you can have access to this side. And the reason you want to do that is you're going to take a blowtorch and just go over every inch of the metal and go back and forth and heat it up. What this does is expand the metal and makes the crack bigger. And that'll allow the oil or whatever you've put inside the case to pass through. So what I personally would recommend is taking an engine stand and mounting the case like this, or really just taking any way to mount this case so you have access to the bottom of it. Filling the case with a non-flammable liquid that's not clear, obviously. I mean, I guess clear would work, but I'd prefer something with a little bit of color like motor oil. And taking a blowtorch and just going down and heating up all the metal. And when you look under the case, you'll be able to see any wet spots, and that'll show you where the cracks are. So that's just a helpful little hint that I learned from my journey with this blown-up Beetle. Alright, moving on to the left side of the case, also known as the studded side of the case. I'm just going to highlight a couple more areas of concern that you're going to look for before you decide to get your case machined or reuse it. Odds are, if the main bearing bores on the other side of the case pass on your inspection of the other side, they're going to pass on this side. Just take the extra 10 seconds to look, make sure there isn't any gouging, or if you spun a bearing, make sure there's no damage. If you spun a bearing, odds are you're going to have to replace your case anyway, but you never know, you might get lucky. Again, you're going to want to check your lifter bores here. Make sure that there's no excessive play. And yeah, so the only really key differences between this side and the other side of the case are where the distributor drive pinion goes, and the fact that this is the side of the case where the number 3 cylinder is. So if you haven't really worked on a whole lot of Volkswagens yet, especially the Type 1, you won't know this, but the 3rd cylinder is the one that gets the hottest. So because of the way it's positioned in the engine bay, it gets the least amount of cold air from the cooling system, and so this side gets really hot, and that's where the number 3 cylinder is, excuse me. So when I was saying before checking for cracks, you're going to do all the same steps as on the last side of the case. Check where the head studs go in and where the metal is between the holes where the barrels go. Check your push rod tube holes. You're going to check back here for the less common ones near the oil pump and where your crank comes out and your crank pulley is. But you're going to want to pay really close attention to this number 3 cylinder because the cracks most often are contained in this area. The most common one is as far as the head stud cracks go are this one right here. This is a later case, so as you can see, it's been deep studded. On all the other ones, the case savers or the inserts that they go in are easily visible. This has actually been drilled out about 1.5 inches downwards, and the threads have been relocated down there, which is called the deep stud. This puts the stud in much thicker metal. As you can see here, there's a big chunk of magnesium right there. So that way, there's much less likely that it'll crack, and if it does crack, it's not where the head stud actually mounts into the case. It's just like the little metal right here. So it's not as big of a deal. If your case that you're going to reuse isn't deep studded, I highly recommend getting it deep studded. It's not too expensive at your machine shop, and you're already going to pay them a visit. The really big area you're going to look for cracks is behind the number 3 cylinder, in this area right here specifically. On later cases, this actually is kind of filled in, so instead of being recessed, this will be completely flat. So the metal's a lot thicker, and that made the cracks a lot less common. But on especially early to mid-range cases, there's not that much metal here, and this part gets like the least amount of cooling because it's mounted directly to the transmission right here. So the only air you're really getting is whatever's inside the bell housing. And so you get a lot of cracks concentrated in this area right here. Sometimes it's up in this upper triangle right here. You might as well look up here as well, and then take a quick glance at this stuff down here, but you really want to take a good gander at this section right here. So if this side of the case passes all those inspections, you have your main bores are good, your lifter bores are good, there's no cracks anywhere, especially near that number 3 cylinder. The last thing I'd recommend if you're going to reuse your case is getting a raised, not a raised cam plug, but a chamfered cam plug, I suppose. So when your camshaft is sitting in your engine like this plug is basically when you slap the case halves together, this is what keeps oil from just shooting out the side. On early cases, this plug will be flat. As you can see here, this has got like a slight bulge in it, and what that bulge does is it's another way to prevent oil from leaking out. So instead of just relying on sealant around a smooth surface, you have a notch that it mounts in so that the oil has a harder time coming out. The benefits for this are, one, like I said, you're not gonna, these hardly ever leak, especially the rubber ones. Sometimes the metal ones, when you use the sealant on the outside, eventually they'll still kind of start to leak because it's metal on metal. But they sell, CB Performance sells like a $5 one that's rubber. That's reusable. You own a Type 1 Volkswagen, let's face it, you're going to have to rebuild it, if you plan on owning it for an extended period of time. And they never ever leak. I've never had one of my friends tell me, oh, my grooved cam plug leaked. So that's a really simple thing too. Machine shop will probably charge you, depending on how much work you're getting there and where you are, anywhere from like $30 to $100 to do. I would highly recommend it. It's worth it. And after that's said and done, I just thought of another last little check you're going to want to do, and this is also very important, is you're going to want to take, there goes the cam. You're going to want to take your distributor drive pinion, like I was kind of mentioning earlier before, and throw it in the hole here. And what you're checking for here is side-to-side play. So when you wiggle this back and forth, well, you really shouldn't be able to. It should still be able to rotate freely, but it shouldn't like, not again, like the lifter boards knock back and forth. This is because you're gonna have a helical gear on your crank that drives this pinion, and you don't want this pinion to be knocking around because that's what your distributor amounts to, and that's your whole ignition system. So you really want to make sure that the tolerances for this are pretty exact. You're not going to want to feel any side-to-side up and down movement here, but it should still spin freely in the bore when it's lubricated. And yeah, that's the last check you're going to want to do on this side of the engine case. If your other side passes and this side passes, I'd say, you know, take it to the machine shop, have them inspect it. It's always good to have another set of eyes. And usually if you do all your work with them, they'll waive, you know, whatever inspection fee they have. And then what you're just going to want to do is get an align bore. You're going to want to make sure, again, no cracks, no major damage to the case. But other than that, you're ready to reuse your case. If you're like me, it's unfortunate. This case is garbage, as well as another case I had lying around, which really stinks. But if that happens to you, I'll show you what I did to solve my problem. Alright, so if you're in the same boat as me and your case isn't usable, the one that came out of your Beetle, you have two options going forward. You can buy a magnesium case, an aftermarket magnesium case, or you can buy an aftermarket aluminum case. I chose the aluminum case, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. But there are some benefits to the magnesium. The first being cost. I think this shipping and everything out the door was $940, now it's on sale. If you go to the right nooks and crannies of the internet, you can find a brand new magnesium case by MP or even the CB ones. They'll start at around $600, and the next ones kind of end around the $900, $950 mark. So if cost is an issue for you and you just want to get it on the road as soon as possible, definitely consider a magnesium case. The second thing is they're a lot lighter. The aluminum cases, since they're solid aluminum and not a magnesium aluminum alloy, on average tend to weigh 10 to 20 pounds more than a magnesium case. So if you're trying to build something that's light, I'd definitely consider that as well. And the third benefit is the oil holes, which aren't on this side of the case. I'll show you on the other side. On magnesium cases, usually tend to line up better with the bearings. As you can see in mine, and I'll show you how to do this in a future video, because the oil holes didn't line up with the galleys and the bearings, I actually had to take a Dremel and chamfer like a little semicircle out of there so the oil can get in, and I'll have good oil pressure. So if you're not comfortable with, you know, dremeling stuff or kind of doing some polishing of materials, I think a magnesium case is the better way to go, because number one, it's a softer material, so it's easier to do that if you still have to. And number two, odds are that you won't have to do nearly as much work as you will to an aluminum case. As you can clearly see, I chose an aluminum case. I got the Autolinea Super case, and I'll kind of do a brief highlight of why I did that right now. And then in the next video, I'll show you all the steps that you need to do to ensure that your case is ready to go. You can't, even though this is a brand new part, and with most things you can just, as soon as you get a new part, you automatically assume, oh, it's ready. Obviously it passed quality control, I can build my motor now. There's a couple little things you're going to want to do before you get cracking and get all hyped about that. Because the last thing you want to do is buy a $930 case, throw $4,000 of parts into it, and then it blow up 2,000 miles later, and it's just because of a little hole you needed to open up or a hole you needed to drill for oil flow. So I'll go over that in the next video, but for now, I'll show you why I chose an aluminum case. So first off, this case has shuffle pins, which are these little guys right here. On the side of the case that you saw earlier in the video, this surface is completely flat. These pins aren't in there. And these pins are beneficial in a couple ways. First, they give added strength to your case when it's bolted together. Instead of just the outside bolts holding it together, you have these that are in a recessed hole on the other side of the case that I'll highlight when we cut over to that side. And that'll keep the case from, it'll kind of be like a vibration absorber, so to speak. So these things will keep the case aligned and kind of prevent some damage that you usually would associate from case vibration over time. A second benefit is it keeps your case aligned. So over time, especially on magnesium cases, because they're soft, and the OEM ones specifically, they'll kind of shift like this over time, either up and down. Just because the metal, since they're two separate pieces of metal and you can't have the exact same composition of alloy every time you make something, there will be little differences that over time the case will shift. Sometimes it'll warp like that. Warping is usually due to overheating, and if it warps, again, you're probably going to need a new case. But there is sometimes a case will shift over time. These pins prevent that. Some other benefits to an aluminum case. On this side, there's really not a whole lot different than on the magnesium case. The only thing I will say is it's kind of nice when you get any aftermarket case, but especially an aluminum one, because usually you can select the size of the holes here. Why that's good is if you're like me and you're building an engine that's a little bit larger than stock. I'm going to be building a 1776. If you're going to reuse a stock case, you need to get these bored out by a machine shop anyway. So when you buy a new case, if you're able to select the size you need and you can skip that trip, it's kind of nice. Also, when you roll it in with the cost of the case, it usually ends up being a little bit more cost effective. So like I said before, this side of the case, really not a whole lot different than a stock case, but where the difference really shines is on the other side, and we'll go there in just a second. Alright, so here we have the studded side of my aluminum case. I have it mounted to an engine stand, so it's a little bit easier to rotate for the video. But the benefits on this side of the case, on the inside, again, not a whole lot different, but you'll have these little holes here that are machined in for the shuffle pins, so you don't get that case warpage or movement, and just for added durability. And then other than that, on the inside of the case, it's really not that different. On the outside of the case, there are a couple differences. Number 3 cylinders, deep studded again, which is good for cracking, but again, this is also aluminum, so that's much less likely to occur to begin with, but it's just for added strength that they do that, and that's cool if you had a case that wasn't deep studded originally. Another thing is, if you've got a really old Beetle, you'll see on the back when you take your case apart, you're only going to have one of these holes. That's called a single oil relief case. Every aftermarket case you're going to buy, regardless of aluminum or magnesium, is going to be a dual oil relief, so you'll get the two. The main benefit of this is it's better oil control and better cooling of the oil, more importantly. So but if you have a single oil control case, especially if it's worn, if you're trying to keep it all original and matching numbers and all that jazz, go ahead and reuse it. But if you want something that's a little bit more reliable for like a daily or something you're going to take on longer trips, you definitely want a dual oil release case. So that's another benefit if you've got an older case. And lastly, where the aluminum case really shines is right here. So like I showed you before on the bell housing side of the case on a magnesium case, there's not that much material here, and that causes cracks. On top of this being aluminum, they also take and make it completely filled in with metal. So they actually just machine it to be perfectly flat. So, I mean, the metal right here is probably at least half an inch thick to probably an inch if you really wanted to measure it. That creates a lot of added durability. It adds more metal for the heat to sink in on that side where the number 3 cylinder is. And it just makes sure that it will never ever under any circumstance crack on you when you're driving. So that's another awesome benefit. It's honestly my personal favorite of all the things that you get with an aluminum case, is just knowing that your number 3 cylinder is extra protected, on top of it being all aluminum, so you never have to worry about any cracks or any shenanigans where you have to take your motor apart and cry more tears than you already have. Alright guys, so we're at the end of the video. Showed you all the details of a case you're trying to reuse, what you should look for. If it doesn't pass any of those tests, you want to make sure you get a new case, whether it be magnesium or aluminum, but you want to make sure you have clean slate for when you're building your engine. A couple last points that I want to go over before I end this one are some resources for you to use. Hopefully these videos will be helpful going forward, but if you need something, if you're maybe more of a person that likes to read, or you want some like really nitty-gritty technical stuff, there's a couple places you can go. So there's a forum called thesamba.com, that's the and then SAMBA.com. They have thousands and thousands of threads that are really informative and that actually have helped me a lot during my build process. They go through, engines, transmissions, body parts, body types, how to wire stuff up. They've got wiring diagrams, OEM, repair manuals, stuff like that. Some really hard to find and valuable resources that I recommend going there to check out if you need any of those things. There's also a blog by a guy named Hoover. I believe it's called Hoover's Mod, so Hoover, and then mod. I'll leave links to these in the description just to be safe. He built a really, really, really nice motor, and his blog goes super in depth on especially the case building and modifying process. I mean, he does some stuff that I wouldn't even dream of doing, just because it's really if you're just trying to build like some crazy all-out high performer. I'm going for a daily driver, so it's not really my cup of tea. But his stuff is actually really helpful for deciding what machine work I wanted to do and what I could do myself versus what I need to pay a shop for. So if you need something like that, highly recommend checking his blog out. And then lastly, a couple places to get good quality parts for fair prices. If you're in the SoCal area like me, there's a place, I'm actually wearing their shirt. Pureside Parts in Huntington Beach. I've bought a bunch of parts from them. The owner is super cool. He'll actually do, I don't know if he'll do it when this video comes out, but he does price matching. I'm assuming he'll do that. He's really awesome. So they only carry the good quality stuff. They don't, and they'll tell you kind of like a range, like, oh, this is a Chinese part, this is a German part. I've had, problems with this in XXX like situation, or XXX, nice. X or Y situation. He'll really help you along with the process. He's not just there to sell you parts. If you need advice or you want to show him some pictures to kind of to see what his recommendation would be, he's there for you. He's really cool. Another place that I go, and the last thing I'll say before I end the video, is CB Performance. If you've owned a Beetle or any Volkswagen for more than a week, you've probably heard of them. They're a speed shop up in NorCal, but they have a really, really easy to use website. It's the shipping for what you order. I had like a crazy order. I ordered like a crankshaft and a bunch of other really heavy stuff, and I think for the basic shipping it was like $20. So it's really not bad. The prices are fair, and their parts are like up with Pureside. They do some of their own stuff in house, and the other stuff that they carry, they make sure isn't some cheap piece of crap that's gonna go out on you, a week after you install it. Again, they're also really on the customer service side of things. They helped me kind of pick out which camshaft that I wanted to use. We'll go into that in another video. But yeah, they were super awesome too. If you need parts, I go to either of those two places, depending on which one's more convenient. And yeah, thank you for watching my first video. Again, I'm sorry for the audio quality, the video quality. Still getting used to this whole shebang here, but I hope it was at least helpful. It might have not have been professional, but I hope the information in it was useful to you. If you liked it, like it. If you want to see more, subscribe. Up to you. It's whatever. Yeah, have fun with your Volkswagen projects, and I'll see you in the next one.